All right. Done and done. Would you like a PowerPoint pointer thingy?
I like power.
It's odd. You can't hold down these for very long.
Yeah.
You'll just actually do it.
I think
this actually means next, and that means backwards.
Okay.
For some reason. And it does have a laser pointer.
Okay. I just wanted for the laser.
Would you like your mic?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes, you may help me. Don't pinch me.
No.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah, we'll turn off all the lights. It's not about me, it's about the mushrooms, but I still better put on my glasses. Okay. Let's see, can we make that a little bigger? I should have done that quite a while ago. Okay, I like maximum screen for everybody. We'll move this back. There we go. Look at that, the mushrooms are growing. And now we go, you do the focus there. Okay. And then, yeah, let's have it a little down. I think otherwise people get a stiff neck. You know how to do that? Well, we get rid of this down below. That's too low. Uh-oh. Switched off. We did this before. Okay, well, I can already, should I? Or you want to do proper introduction and everything?
Oh, sorry. No, I did not do that. Sorry.
It's okay, it's okay.
Feel free to introduce.
So while Melanie is struggling with the projector, which I all started the chaos here, it will come back. But it's really nice when the screen is as big as possible, because I really spend a lot of time taking my pictures and then also working on them I do photo stacking, which means you take many pictures in different levels of focus, and then software puts it together, but often you have to correct it by hand. And then I do Photoshop in order to get really the nicest out of a mushroom. My name is Daniel Winkler. I grew up in Germany. I moved to the US in 1996. First, I traveled there following the Grateful Dead around and met my wife, and she lured me over to the US. And so I ended up in Seattle, which is really good for the mushrooms. Lots of great forest. And back when I arrived there, not so much competition. It has changed, and I'm part of the Puget Sound Mycological Society. And we've trained thousands of people by now through our classes, and the competition is there, but there's so much for everyone and so many great mushrooms. And so today I will talk mostly about edible mushrooms, because that's how most people connect to mushrooms. I mean, there's so much beauty out there and interesting stuff besides edibility. And I hear even there's birders out there who don't ask for every bird, is it edible, right? So there's more to organisms than to eat them, but it's really nice if you can enjoy them as well. And luckily, as mushroom lovers, we are not like these vegetarians who dig up a beet or a carrot and kill the whole organism. No, as mushroom people, we just pick the fruit and the tree, we pick the apple and the tree is still alive underground. So we are much more victims than these vegetarians who kill beets and carrots and all these things. So anyways, and we getting there? I'm running out of stories here. Ta-da! There's still something in the screen that it's okay. Next one is, okay, this is this thing here, down. There we go. Okay, so fruits of the forest. There should have been fungal fruits of the forest, but publishing is not always a simple thing. And that's a book I just published last October, and my focus was edible mushrooms. So you're not going to find every Cordinarius in there unless it's edible or it's deadly. Then there's 3 Cordinarius in there. So there's a big genus with mostly non-edible mushrooms. And I bring up a lot of things about edibility you don't find in the other mushroom books. And part of it is also because I grew up in Germany, and I accessed a lot of European literature, German stuff, Italian stuff, looked up some French stuff, also Scandinavia, worked on edible mushrooms in High Asia, Tibet, China, and Latin America, which is not so great for the edible mushrooms. but there's all kinds of other good mushrooms. And so I put that all in the book. That's what I did when COVID grounded me. So that was the best that could happen to me. Otherwise, it's much more exciting to go in the woods and look for new treasures. So foraging is really a thing the whole family can do. And kids are really good at foraging too. They're close to the ground, they have sharp eyes, and I bet any 5 or 6-year-old can learn their chanterelles and their boletes within a day. It's like they have already all the capacity. I mean, we as humans, we've been foraging for millions of years, you know, and yes, there was a few years where we ended up in weird places with neon lights and we picked stuff out of shelves. And by the way, there's more toxins to be found in any supermarket than we find in the forest. I mean, just imagine you get lost in the houseware department and there's all these deadly cleaners or so, you know. So be careful in the forest, be more careful even in the supermarket. And foraging is something we all have. And of course, we, you know, if we haven't grown up with it, it seems a little scary. And but it doesn't have to be. And part of it, when you talk about edible mushrooms, is that you get the information, are there dangerous lookalikes or not? Because that makes all the difference. So I'm sure many of you pick blackberries and other berries, right? Did anybody take any classes for berry picking? Are you guys crazy? There's deadly. Oh, you did. I'm so proud of you, Sinclair. And you're still alive, right? Parts of it, because there's deadly berries out there, you know? And that's just the cultural difference. With berries, we don't think twice about it. And it's nobody, oh, it's a blackberry. Is there deadly berries out there? We just trust the person who tells us that's a blackberry. We pick it up and we do it without any terminology, you know, without any scientific names. We just recognize that thorny stuff with that purple blackish things. These are blackberries. And we have plenty of mushrooms we can approach the same way, like chanterelles or borels or king boletes. You don't need to know much. And yes, some of them, ooh, challenging. You really want to put your life on the line for a subtle detail as some little scales on a stem versus none of them. Echinuromyces mutabilis, choice edible in all the European books here, nobody talks about, but it has a very galerina, is very, the false skull cap or the death bell is really similar. And so nobody talked about that. I'm not all powerful here. It will come. Okay. Well, I can point. No, I have a mouse. And let's see, the mouse sometimes doesn't run away. You try that. Of course, yeah, that's. Oh, it's your computer, not my computer. So my mouse has no power here. Okay, we can do, yeah, put it in and out. So here you have also the mentioning of forest bathing, which Shinrin Roku in Japanese. And we have scientific studies that show if you spend 2 hours, 3 hours, or a day or 2 days in the forest, your antibody count goes up. So you don't need to do anything. Just us hanging out in the forest improves our immune system. And, you know, there's now in Germany, there's clinics for forest bathing. They always have been, you know, when you had TBC or so, they would put you in a mountain, in a really clean area with mountain fresh air and so on. Or, you know, so it's really something which we all know. When we're in the forest, we are happy, right? I mean, especially if we find good mushrooms, but even if we don't do great with the mushrooms, it makes us feel good. So here, it's okay, stay with that. I want to talk about the food qualities of mushrooms. You pick an old survival guide and it will tell you, don't waste your time on mushrooms. They have no nutritional value and they might kill you before they feed you. And, you know, this is a while ago and luckily this has changed quite a bit. So when we look at a mushroom, 90% of the mushroom is water. The 10% that are not water, we have 30 to 40% protein is in there. So really good. We have a little bit of fat. We have lots of minerals, important minerals. You know, there's more calcium, magnesium, and potassium in a mushroom than there's in a banana, for example. So I haven't done this research. I'm just believing here, okay? There was other people who write about that should have some credentials, and I'm just blindly believing that information. And I want to believe it too. It sounds so good, right? And then vitamins A, C, B, and D, some in trace amounts, other really abundant. Vitamin D I'll talk about a little bit later. And then really important is the fiber in the mushrooms and also the sugars, the polysaccharides. So these are big complex molecules that really help our digestive system and our immune system. So part of it is already that our immune system gets a hit from the mushroom because supposedly of the chitin, like insects or something like that, and the immune system just reacts to that. I read somewhere, sounds simple enough. And these polysaccharides, like beta-glucans or so, there's a wide range of research that really shows how helpful it is for our digestive system. And then a little detail like this, like the study on the lower left by Lei Fang, Singapore, who likes to do these studies of just what happens when people eat mushrooms. He's not going into this mushroom or that mushroom, medicinal mushroom, just 2 portions of mushrooms a week over a long time, big group. And he could document that 50% reduced odds of having, what was that? Mild cognitive impairment, 50% reduction. So just the fact you eat your mushrooms, how many weeks? I don't know. I haven't eaten them for too long, I guess. So, I mean, just by eating mushrooms, you know, not by doing anything crazy with them, not by taking a daily dose and paying for extracts or so, just having mushrooms as part of your diet makes, and there's a whole bunch of studies like that that really show nice benefits. And then another key point is also when you look at the carbon footprint of mushrooms. Now, I'm not talking about these crazy mushroom people that drive 5 hours to bring home a basket of morels in spring, then the carbon footprint is not so convincing. But as a society, eating more cultivated mushrooms versus meat makes a big difference. And there's no sacrifice. You know, it's not like when I enjoy my mushrooms cooked that I say, oh, I need meat, you know. The mushrooms already have that nice savory umami taste. There's the protein there and give such a nice taste to things. So really, really an important thing with edible mushrooms that they're such a low carbon alternative to meat. Next one. So when we go out, we hope we come back with these nice baskets filled of mushrooms. So that wasn't a weekend. There was many years where, you know, I managed to take these nice pictures. And of course, there's always egg cartons down below to make it look full, right? But yeah, that's the luckiest days when you find a whole bunch of nice mushrooms. On the right, for example, you have a basket of Amanita muscaria, which you can turn into an edible by detoxification. I might have a slide for that later on. Next one. So in the book, I talk about the 14 fantastic fungi. So these are mushrooms that are easy to identify, that don't have a dangerous lookalike, or, you know, of course, you can always mess up, but with a certain amount of attention and knowing that you should pay attention to what you stuff in your system. Yeah, and as you can tell, only on the bottom, there's 3 gilt mushrooms. So as soon as you look into gilt mushrooms, you have to pay much more attention. You gotta look sharper, you gotta discern many more details, you gotta think about spore color, and you gotta pay so much more attention than when you look at non-gilt mushrooms like chanterelles or morels, boletes, then the cauliflower mushroom, puffballs, you know, all these other mushrooms, hedgehogs are much easier to identify, and I'll talk about them. Next one. So the luckiest, I think, the easiest for us out here is the golden chanterelle. I mean, they are easy to identify, you know, they have that bright color that makes them easily visible. They forgive us when we turn diverse forest into zones of, well, okay, if we have just plantations where there's hardly any species besides the few trees that are planted, but the chanterelle is still there. And they can be really abundant in Douglas fir hemlock plantations. They have an odor, which the fruity apricot-like odor, which is really helpful. And this is one thing I keep emphasizing. Use all your senses. Smell, taste, feel, texture. It's so much easier to get to know a mushroom, to feel safe about the identification if you don't just work visual. So you can taste any mushroom as long as you don't swallow. So you can put them in your mouth, you can taste them, and then you spit out. Unless you are sure what you have and you know it's one of the mushrooms we can eat raw, which in general we say you should not eat a mushroom raw unless you have the information that it is okay to eat certain mushrooms raw, like king boletes are excellent raw, or You know, some people like matsutake raw or button mushrooms you can eat raw, for example. Chanterelle, you don't want to eat raw. It's going to be spicy. The German name, one of the German names is Pfifferling, which means pepper mushroom. And they're not as peppery as a spicy pepper bolete, but when you keep them in your mouth, like let's say 30 seconds or so, you will get a spicy aftertaste. I mean, nobody ever tries to eat them raw, right? Though they have that nice aroma and they have that fruity first taste, but then they turn spicy. But the spiciness actually is what's used in Eastern Europe to fight parasites, digestive parasites, and which you can tell it works because our chanterelles don't have any larvae, right? So they have this component. I looked it up somewhere and have a reference, but I can't recall it. The problem is you cook them, you lose the power. So if it's used as a medicinal to fight intestinal parasites, you have to dry them or you do an alcohol extract. But when you cook them, you neutralize that anti-parasitic power. And then whenever you pick a mushroom that is ectomycorrhizal, which means it is root associated, and these root-associated mushrooms, they grow with specific trees. And it's easier to find a tree first than it is to find a mushroom. And certain mushrooms, you look for chanterelle and you happen to be in a grove of red cedar and maples, there will be no chanterelle because these two trees don't have ectomycorrhizal mushrooms. So, but then you know, oh, Douglas fir plantation, hemlocks, there should be chanterelles here. Or spruce and true firs in the mountains, there should be king boletes. So this is when you want to find specific mushrooms, you got to look at their partner trees. Now there's other mushrooms that are saprobic. That means they break down biomass. That's usually mushrooms you can buy year round in a supermarket. Like, for example, oysters, button mushrooms, shiitake, you know, these are what they call the exotic mushrooms, right? Shiitake and oyster mushroom. What's the third one? Portobello, very exotic too. Because it's not a button mushroom, right? It's a mature button mushroom. But these are all cultivated. They're saprobic. They live off breaking down biomass. But many of the mushrooms of our choice edibles like boletes and chanterelles and matsutake, they are root associated. So knowing the trees they grow with is really important. And then the seasonality. You can go 11 months in the right spot in the forest, look for your mushroom. It's not going to be there because there's a seasonality for the fruiting. You have to remember the mushroom is just the apple. The tree is around year round, but that's underground. But that sexual organ that the mushroom produces to drop its spores, that is seasonal. And you know, some mushrooms nearly can do it year round, like oysters. Whenever there's a warm, moist period, oysters might grow fruiting bodies. But like the king boletes, they do it, you know, just the first nice moist period in fall, and then they're done. Next one. There's a couple lookalikes. So with the chanterelles, even the lookalikes here are pretty harmless. The worst is probably on the lower right, the woolly vase or the woolly chanterelle, Turbinellus flocosus, not closely related to a chanterelle, but closer related to a coral. Some people call it the shitter. So it really can mess up your digestive system. I just talked to a guy for 2 days. He had cramps and tried to empty the system that was well emptied already early on in the game. So somebody else told me secondhand information. A friend talked to somebody who says, oh, we've been eating that for years, but we cook it for half an hour. So this is really a thing. When you hear, when a mushroom has the footnote that some people get problems, just cook the hell out of it. So with a vegetable or piece of meat, vegetables like zucchinis, right? Porcinis ain't no zucchini. So porcinis you can cook long as there's enough water in the frying pan or whatever you do with them. They don't get tough on you or they don't get mushy too if you keep the balance well. Meat might get turned into leather, but mushrooms you can cook them for half an hour and you don't lose much. Yes, you might lose some vitamins, but you rather want to reduce the vitamin load, but make them more digestible. Mushrooms are made out of chitin, and that's a really it's close to cellulose. It's very tough, hard to break down, and not everybody, many of us don't have the enzyme to break down chitin. It's called chitinase. And so the cooking really helps you to get to the nutrients and make them available to you. So always better to overcook, especially if there's a footnote. Be careful. Then we have on the upper right the woolly pine spike, Chromogumphus tomentosus, which is edible, which you will recognize in the frying pan because that one's going to turn purple when you cook it, not like the chanterelles. It is related to the boletes, though it has gills, and it's all right, but it's not as good as a chanterelle. And then in the center down below is the false chanterelle, which when you have it in your hand, there's no weight to it. It's so lightweight. It's so different than a chanterelle. You know, if you wouldn't look at it and see yellow and yellow and think it's the same, if you use not your sight, everything else will tell you it's not a chanterelle. But the lightweight is really characteristic. And many people don't get sick from eating that. If you maybe eat a whole plate, then there's a good amount of people that get a digestive reaction. And then really can be quite a lookalike, especially in spring, is the Cantoroscibe gruberi, the shanty cap. And I had to make up a couple common names because we don't have common names for all the mushrooms, which is a pity. Any other Western country or industrialized country where there's money for publications, there's common names. Even in the UK, the motherland of fungophobia, the irrational fear of mushrooms. And that's what plagues people here quite a bit still, right? There is a general list of suggested common names for all the mushrooms. And yes, some sound odd if the scientific name is just translated and it's not official like a scientific name, but it's the British Mycological Society where people sat together and made that up. And in Germany, in France, Italy, China, Japan, all these places have these things. Where don't we have it? US and Canada. People tried, but then people say, oh, come on, you can learn a little Latin. Hello, most of these mushroom names are Greek anyways, at least the genera, they're Latinized, you know? So I think it's really important. If you want to get mushroom knowledge out into, share the joy with other people. Common names are so helpful. And yes, they can be different from location to location and so on, but with publications. And I hope I would have had Cam and Andy's book a little earlier for the common names to correlate with them, but there's no harm having several common names. I mean, we have how many scientific names now for every mushroom, changing every year now. So, you know, not a problem. And then, so the shanty cap, Cantoroscibe gruberi, is related to Hygrophorus, to the wood waxes, and is edible. And then the yellow wax gill, Hygroscipy flavescens, is harmless, but it turns just into mush when you cook it. So, you know, there's of course other yellow mushrooms you could confuse it for, and you go down to California and people confuse it with actually a toxic mushroom, the jack-o'-lantern mushroom, but that grows in clusters on wood. And that's something like when a book tells you a mushroom grows on wood and you find it growing in soil, terrestrial, on the ground, you can't ignore that. That's really important information because it's also so easy for us to make the distinction between I found it on wood versus I found it on the ground. And yes, it could grow on the ground and there was a piece of wood underground. But if you don't know your mushroom, you know, don't make that leap. Well, there might have been a piece of wood and now I eat it anyways. You know, no, that's foolish. I mean, yeah, some people like to live with a little excitement, but and at least you guys here up in Canada where we have a medical system that takes care of the people. Down in the US, I always tease them, you can't even just deal with your poisoning, you have to worry about going bankrupt from poisoning yourself, right? Okay, next one. So chanterelles, the best to keep them is cook and freeze. Drying, they get really tough. And if you have too many of them, you just put them in the oven after you wash them. Washing, no problem. These guys live out in the rain. They handle washing really fine. When you wash mushrooms, you don't want to get a sponge in a bolete. You don't want to get wet and the gills under the cap. And you can wash mushrooms without. But if they're really dirty, so you wash it. And then what you do is you let them dry or you do dry frying. And I talk about dry frying a little later. So chanterelles, the best is to cook and freeze. And yes, you can powder them. There's still a somewhat all right taste, but it's the best really cooking. And there's a couple of things I do with it. So I had only chanterelles once this fall. Not so many out there. They were still maybe shocked from last year's drought and whatever. In Europe, there's research that compares fruitings to the weather for 1, 2, or 3 years back. So they try to correlate because the host trees with these root-associated mushroom provides the sugars, which the mushrooms will use for their fruiting. And the mushrooms pay back in nutrients and water. And so it's not just about the mushroom wanting to fruit, it's the tree providing the nutrients, the sugars to the mushroom to fruit. So it's a really close symbiosis, and there's hardly any research out here about seasonality and how that correlates. And most information is people like us who follow them around and get ideas and can see, well, we had enough rain. I remember in October where we had 14 inches of rain down in the Seattle area, and there was hardly any mushrooms. But it was like the first summer, which was really pronounced dry, maybe 97 or 98 or something like that. And the trees just were so stressed that, yeah, we have all the water now, but we're on the edge here. We have no sugars for you mushrooms. Next one. So is the layout really that messed up? Yeah, that's the program. Okay. Here, chanterelles and other cultures. This is a lady in Bhutan, upper left. They love to sell them in plastic bags, which of course we all try to avoid to keep our mushroom in plastic bags. You always can pick them in plastic bags, but don't leave them closed up overnight in a plastic bag. They will sit in their own sweat, and the whole thing turns into a mush and gets really nasty quickly. Mushrooms need to breathe. 90% of water means they evaporate a lot of water, and if you have it closed in, they will sit in their own sweat. And we all know that, from camping or whatever outdoor activity, you need some breathing materials, otherwise it gets nasty. Same for the mushrooms. And so once you have your mushrooms long enough in the fridge that they evaporated a lot of the excess water, then you can put them more or less airtight in a container. Chanterelles after 10 days in the fridge, they will go soggy at that point anymore. Then a lady in Tibet in the middle, down on the lower right in Guyana, which is a culturally Caribbean country at the north end of South America, where I did some work for the Amazon conservation team there. And then upper right in Colombia, that's Tatiana San Juan, who I work with doing my mushrooming tours. She got a PhD working on cordyceps. Next picture. This is a couple beautiful mushrooms from Colombia, a marasmius, so related to our fairy ring mushroom. No idea about edibility. There's over 1,000 species of marasmius. They all tend to have a tough stem. So whenever you have a little mushroom with a slender stem, and the stems are pretty firm, and often the stem gets lighter to the upper part, then it could be a marasmus. Next one. This is a Favolaskia, and Favolaskia, these names would be all visible in my version of the presentation, but it's the other computer. Well, you all know Favolaskia, genetically speaking, is basically a mycena. So when you do your DNA, it falls right in the middle of mycena, but it has a whole different cap structure, which is apparently, when it comes to genetic coding, doesn't make a big difference if all the rest still puts it right with mycena. Next one. See, that's the issue now. Now I don't see the names anymore. Oh, it's there, it's there. Stringea, down there very dark. Laternia, like a lantern. This is a stinkhorn, a tiny stinkhorn, and the stinkhorns, they do grow in all kinds of directions. So many of the mushrooms make sure that the caps are aligned with gravitation, so the spores drop down straight, but the stinkhorns, they just go in any direction because they wait for the flies or other insects to come to eat the stinky spore mass and then carry that around. Next one. Oh, there it is. So here now cordyceps, there's Tatiana again, and this is a cordyceps she has described in Mycologia. So my picture made it on the cover of Mycologia. This is pretty good sized grasshopper, maybe, what is it, 6-8 centimeters, big guy. And then of course it's not alive in that stage. Inside is everything mycelium, and then this parasite that overpowers the immune system of the cordyceps grows its fruiting bodies, and you see the top white areas. It's okay, it's okay. Great transition, Melanie, you're reading my mind. This is a moth, and you see the fruiting bodies of the cordyceps growing, and this is, I'm sure the moss has been infected at least 4 weeks, maybe 6 or 8 weeks, and the cordyceps makes it live quite long. So it's a firm mushroom. So whenever you see a little thing like a club-shaped thing where you think, oh, yellow little club, this could be a cordyceps. If you touch it, it breaks. It's not going to be a cordyceps. They're firm. They're tough structured. Next one. And this is basically here the holy grail of cordyceps hunting. This is a nice big tarantula. You have on the right side under more, you have the function that this thing disappears. Yes, that can disappear. But whenever you get a new person online, it's going to come back. Can we turn off that light here too? Huh? I don't know either. Anyways, if it's okay, so here we are. This is a cordyceps in Tibet. That's how I got into cordyceps. The guy holds a bag, and that bag is maybe $20,000, maybe $30,000. Has thousands of these cordyceps in there, maybe not thousands, yeah, several thousands. A pound is about highest quality 800, lowest quality maybe 3,000 per pound. And then one of them can go anywhere, let's say at this point, maybe from 50 cents to $20 for the collectors in the field. And then the price is usually double till it's out for retail. And so that's how I got really serious into mushrooms. I was doing environmental work in Tibet. And whenever I asked people, how do you make a living? It was always collecting mushrooms and especially caterpillar fungus, which grows around tree line. Next picture. So people in spring, when life comes back, same point as for us, the morels, which happen in Tibet too. People would move up into the grasslands. And here this was all blue earthquake support tents. The region got after an earthquake and people moved up there, and every day they would go out, collect in the mountains and walk up 1,000 meters or 500 meters in altitude. And then when you're in the right areas, you're on your knees looking for these tiny brown things in brown grass. So hard to find, but they would make in 4 or 6 weeks enough cash that would string them through the whole year. And so I calculated back then, there was research I did in 2006 or 7. And I was calculating that 40% of the rural cash income in the Tibetan areas comes from caterpillar fungus. And that would apply for areas that had it and that didn't have it. But wherever there's good grazing, there's caterpillar fungus. Next one. So you don't always have to go to Tibet to see caterpillar fungus. This is Ophiocordyceps variabilis, which I first saw in the Amazon. But this is a tiny larvae of a wood-boring fly. You see the head of a pencil in the lower left in comparison for size. And this was in Kirkland in a soft, rotten alder, and in June. So just this tiny orange thing coming out of the wood. And then I dug it out and I found this cordyceps. Next one. And then in the Cascades, I didn't find it, but some members of our mycological society put it on iNaturalist and told me that they found it. They didn't dig it out. So I went with the coordinates on iNaturalist the next week up to the place, and then half an hour up and down that area, which iNaturalist told us, this is the spot, this is the spot. Yeah, it is the spot, but we don't find anything. And we were worried to step on it because it was along the hiking trail. And then after half an hour, we find that little bit of orange coming out of the ground. And the sad story is hiking was never the same in the Pacific Northwest in the summer again, because suddenly you can find cordyceps when you hike. The beauty about hiking in the summer was that I wasn't really looking for mushrooms. I could relax, but last summer that didn't work. The king boletes kept fruiting in June and July because last year was such a bad season that they put out mushrooms all summer. Not many, but they were fruiting. Tricoloma, the Matsutake had a season in July, big flushing in the Cascades, which, you know, most regions around the world in Northern Hemisphere, mushrooms show up in July and August, but we don't have the rains. And this year we didn't really have the rains in a normal year, but because the year before was so bad that they got nervous and we gotta get our spores out. And this is pretty strange. This is a new species, newly described now, Para-Isaria cascadensis. Lots of research done. They found some anti-cancer compounds in there, work by Rich Tehan, who in Corvallis worked on it. And this is on a giant crick, a monster haglet. So a really interesting insect endemic to the Pacific Northwest. Wingless. Next one. Back to the chanterelles. So here the winter chanterelles. This might be the winter for winter chanterelles. They don't mind a little bit of cold. They can freeze and they are fine again afterwards. They grow on mostly old wood, and they can be big patches. They are much smaller. Look at the basket. That's not a big basket. This is a relatively small basket. So they're much smaller than the regular chanterelle, but they have good structure, good taste. And the beauty with cooking with them is that you still have the whole mushroom there. You know, like our big chanterelles, we chop into pieces, and yes, we know it's mushroom. It tastes like mushroom. It's awesome, but these guys keep really that look. On the lower right, you have a lookalike, Chrysomphalina chrysophila, where I found a common name in the UK list, the golden navel, which is a pretty good name, which from above looks just like our winter chanterelle, or our tubies is a nickname for them. And luckily, this Chrysomphalina is not toxic. It seems to be harmless. I don't find it often, but whenever I find it, it is strikingly similar. Unless you look down under the cap, which whenever you go something direction, gilt mushrooms or the chanterelles, they can have some gilt lookalikes. Always look under the cap, and the chanterelles have just much more irregular gill-like structures under the cap. Next one. Some smart people started selling these as purple chanterelles. They're not closely related to chanterelles. They're related to the corals. Here, the pig's ear, and it's fairly easy to identify because of its purple coloration and its interesting, little bit chanterelle-like fertile tissue on the outside of the cap. And this mushroom, the most it has going for it is easy ID and a nice firm flesh. They can get quite old, and they can get a little bit astringent, slightly bitter. So then the best is to make them as protein content of your pasta, of your red sauce or so. But yeah, it's a really beautiful mushroom, but they last very long. And so often when I found them, they were past prime. Next one. So now what I did, I threw in a couple of mushrooms many of you will recognize, but they're not in the Pacific Northwest. So this is a picture from Bhutan. This is a former kingdom in the Himalayas between China and, well, these days China, between Tibet and India, Tibetan culture, but they don't like to make the point, because then the Chinese says, well, wait a minute, you're Tibetan, you're ours. So no, we speak Tsongkha, we are not Tibetan. So this is a big, nice hedgehog, at least that could be 15 centimeters across. And by the length of the teeth of a hedgehog, see these teeth under the cap or spines? The length of the spines will tell you the age of the mushroom, how long that mushroom is growing. And the main problem with hedgehogs, so they're easy, go maybe to the next one. They're easy to identify. There is no toxic lookalike for any mushroom in that range of colors, these pale colors. Forget about the black trumpets on the tray on the lower left. But when you see these teeth under a cap and a pale yellow, pale brown, and then whitish teeth under the cap, you have a hedgehog, a hydenum. And they're all choice edibles. They are closely related to chanterelles, which every pot hunter, okay, you find a few of them, you mix them in with the chanterelles. But before we had the DNA revolution, they were classified with the toothed fungi, which is a conglomerate of all kinds of different mushrooms that were not closely related, but they had this fruiting, these teeth under the cap. So whenever you run into hedgehogs, and one place here for us is with evergreen huckleberries. So that's great habitat. And they fruit also through the winter. So they can go January, February in the right year where there's no hard frost. Next one. And also something related to the chanterelles is the coral fungus. So the white coral fungus is not closely related to all these other much bigger corals. It is related to the chanterelles. They get maybe about 10, 12 centimeters tall, not much bigger. We have a bunch of species. Not all have a name yet, but the most commonly used is Flaviolina coralloides, in the old days, cristata. And they have great structure. They have good taste. Next one, there's one challenge. So we have a third species here. We have more than 3 species, but a common species is the ash coral, Clavulina cinera. And that, when it goes older, it gets that gray look on the stem. And you have to tell that apart from the right side, where we have Hymentosphaeria clavariarum, where it's a secondary parasite that turns purplish, that attacks that mushroom. And that is, at least I found in German sources, that they said it is a troublesome secondary fungus. So usually we stay away from any mushroom that has a secondary infection. The only exception, a secondary infection, the only exemption is the lobster mushroom, right? Where we have a secondary fungus that takes over and then puts its own stamp on that russula and makes it a great edible. So I can't draw that line between the gray of the ash coral and the infection. I mean, yes, the infection is clearly to be told when it's purple. And so I think I might have eaten it, and I never got any problems with eating the Helminthosphaeria. But if it's all white, it's great stuff, and most people ignore it, and it's really enjoyable. Next one. Oh, and then I make crab cakes, like coral cakes, I call them. So whenever I have a mushroom that has these longer branches, good structure for making crab cake style stuff out of it. Hericiums. Hericium. So this happens to be Hericium coralloides growing on an oak, but that's again in Bhutan. So they haven't done DNA on it, but it just looks smack like coralloides. Next one, which we don't have as much coralloides. If you go across eastern BC, across the mountains, you find a whole bunch of them, especially on cottonwoods along rivers. Our most common here is the conifer spearhead, Hericium abiatus, and on oaks, you might have actually the lion's mane, Hericium echinaceum, or something, Erinaceum, I think. And this is Americanum there. I don't know, my labeling, what happened, things changed in size. So what's happening? Oh, you have an old PowerPoint, and my PowerPoint, these pictures have fancy edges where they fade into the background, and that's where these names disappear. Yeah. So, and if I put out my computer, it would all work, but then we have to do the whole Zoom thing again. Unless you need a break immediately, then otherwise, let's just keep it on. The cool stuff about these things is they have shown that they stimulate nerve cell growth. We have double-blind studies from Japan that elderly people who take it as a ground up version of it, that their memory capacity goes up by 15 to 20%. But if you haven't taken it for 3 weeks, you probably forgot you had taken it. So, and if you follow Paul Stamets, and he talks about neurogenesis, that we all make an evolutionary leap by eating mushrooms. So of course that is psilocybe, but it's also hericium. So really tasty mushroom. It's cultivated. You can cultivate it. Great taste, and it has these benefits for our nerve cells. Next one. That would be awesome.
All right, we're gonna take a mini break. I'm not sure it didn't open the PowerPoint.
Yeah, then so okay, that's what we're doing. So try if you can open it in PowerPoint again. If you go just on the file. So it doesn't show colors here too.
And it just keeps saying open, and then it just only does
So
that
you have PowerPoint in the system?
online only. But last time I did this, it gave me an option of opening up the different areas.
So you might have run out of the time not buying it. So that's maybe. Okay, let's see. Okay, where are we?